However, this is a short screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin, covering the area of project management and indeed conclusion of projects. So draw your attention to Chapter 9 of the BPP study text, and these would be the main three areas that we're going to cover. So just moving to this first area of completion, what's involved in the completion of a project? I think the first thing to establish is just going back to our definition of what a project is. We're supposed to deliver a project in effect on time and to a specified sort of cost and indeed quality level. So as you'd expect, really what this completion area looks at is really, has the project been delivered in line with the deliverables as outlined within the project plan, or indeed the PID, the project initiation document. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is this idea of a completion report, and it's just a little summary here for you. What does a completion report do? Well, very much what you would expect. It sort of summarizes, what we've achieved with this particular project, what we've done, and it will on occasion include some sort of sign off, particularly as an external client. And really what we're trying to do is summarize the outcomes and indeed look to compare those outcomes with the specified objectives. So in terms of specifics, we're talking about objectives and outcomes, and these key things here, you'll see that the iron triangle is referred to throughout PM, and if in doubt, always refer back to those three areas of cost and time and quality. But the key thing within this report in terms of the cost side is, as you would expect, some sort of analysis between sort of actual expenditure and expected or anticipated expenditure. Make a nice point here in terms of if there's an external client, it may well be that some elements of this particular section need to be sort of amended or adjusted. Last thing here, we're talking about just the time, again, actual versus budgeted. So you can really see that the report in the main really sets out what we were supposed to do and really what we've done, and covers some key areas in terms of the triangle, not least the cost and indeed the time. Just one final point, perhaps something that students might not think to include within an answer, is that the completion report perhaps will detail anything that is what you would call a sort of an ongoing issue, or any issue that needs to be addressed that's not specifically part of the project itself. May well be a sign-off in some way, shape or form. Okay, so that's the completion report. Let me just move on to the other key area, this area of the audit or the post-completion audit. Now, this is, again, a commonly examined topic, could tie in with the completion report, but not necessarily. And, what are we looking at here in terms of a post-completion audit for a given project? Well, really what we're looking at is lessons, and indeed lessons learned. And really, why do we want to learn lessons? Well, we want to use those lessons for the benefit of future products. Future projects even. And this area of audit will really be split into two main other areas. And the first one is this idea of the client expectations. Now, I'd refer you back up to the completion report when we talked about really, what are the deliverables? What did the client expect? Indeed, what did we expect? And, has the project been completed in line with those expectations? So first area we look at, the design and construction. To some extent, we're talking about quality there, aren't we? And spec, the original specification. Next 2 points, again, referring to our triangle, we're talking about, was it completed on time and indeed within budget? So that first part of the audit really looks at, what did we set out to do, and did we actually do it, and what lessons do we learn from that? And, the second point really is in terms of the management of the project, and to a large extent that's concerned with, what were the problems that we faced, and indeed what was the performance, or how did the stakeholders, particularly the project team and indeed the project manager, how did they perform, individually and as a group? And this audit, post-completion audit, will be in the form of a formal report. And just finally on this area, sort of linking into some of the other areas of the ET syllabus, not least the management area. When we talk about sort of evaluation or performance evaluation, shouldn't really be seen as a negative exercise. And what we're looking to do with this audit is to really learn for the future. And what we're trying to do is to make it hopefully as constructive an exercise as possible. Okay, so just moving on to the next point here. Within Chapter 9, we're looking at further areas of sort of troubleshooting. Okay, so what's important here really is to recognize that within our sort of iron triangle, our three sort of criteria, certainly things don't go right all the time, and more often than not, the examiner, certainly in the area of project management, is going to come at this from the point of view of either us having issues with all three areas of the project, and therefore perhaps there's going to be some sort of constraints or indeed trade-offs between those three areas. Okay, and the examiner will provide you with some sort of problem perhaps, and ask you to utilize your knowledge of perhaps techniques or procedures or indeed methodologies within project management to be able to assess how things could have been done differently, or that perhaps they should be done differently in the future. Okay, so what are the sort of the main problems then in the area of projects? Well, again, you'll see, we'll come onto the triangle on the right hand side in a moment, but you'll see here that again, these areas very much focus outside of the sort of fairly broad poor project management, perhaps a poor project manager. We focus on the triangle again. These things may conflict. There may well be a trade-off between time, cost, and quality, and deadlines or unrealistic deadlines causing perhaps slippage in some way, shape, or form are very, very common with projects. This area here, to some extent, is a fault at the project planning phase, where requirements were not set out in detail, and perhaps over and above that, it may well be that requirements change over the course of the product life cycle, and that will cause a problem in itself. If we look on the right-hand side, again, I've referred to these three areas many times in the videos that we've put up on YouTube on the area of project management. But certainly, you would always want to be referring back to time, cost, and quality, and there will invariably be some sort of trade-off between each of these constraints. Okay. Now, dealing with slippage and sort of options available where there has been some sort of slippage, many of these options, and we really need to rote learn these, many of these are fairly straightforward, and probably suggest that doing nothing may not be the next best option. I would suggest that these would be the more likely ones that would get you some marks here. They're fairly straightforward, adding resources, but obviously there's cost implications to adding more people or indeed adding more money. Working more efficiently or working smarter is an obvious option. Replanning or rescheduling, perhaps looking back at the project plan and perhaps reining in on some of our deliverables or our objectives in some way may be the best option. Notice here we're talking about incentives in some way. It sort of ties in a little bit to theorists like Sart and March, where they're suggesting that loading people up with further funds or further payment or perhaps an incentive may result in a better performance or indeed better output. This one here, the change of the spec, sort of links into replanning and rescheduling to some extent. It may well be that the objectives are unrealistic. Perhaps we can change them, and that will help us to sort of move forward on a more even footing. Okay. On the area of change, change is a common commonly examined area within the E stream, and you'll be familiar with one or two other theorists in the area of change. But key things as regards change, there's a key word, communication. Certainly changes need to be discussed in detail and recorded, documented, but communication is the key issue where change is concerned in project management or indeed in any other area within the E stream. Okay. Next point, or next slide for us here. is this area of project troubleshooting, or indeed further issues on change. What are the main causes of change to the project plan? Well, certainly slippage, falling behind schedule is a key problem that may necessitate change in some way, shape or form. The user requirements, we touched on that just up above, this idea of them either being not correctly defined within the project plan, or indeed the PID, or perhaps changing over time. And we're talking specifically about the project plan here. So we were to set out some sort of key specifications or key deliverables, and if they're going to change over time, that's certainly going to cause us some issues. Okay, interesting one here. Environmental changes, and that may be something that may be difficult to assess. It may be that our sort of risk assessment procedures didn't anticipate a particular change in environment. We can't predict everything, so that may well have caused a change which will impact upon our success or otherwise within this particular project. Now, what sort of things should we consider when changing the plan? Well, the obvious ones are, the impact upon time, cost, and quality. We're looking here, at a sort of a toss-up between costs and benefits. Obviously, the benefits need to outweigh the cost. Clearly, risks and indeed uncertainties are a key area. So where we're changing the plan, we need to reassess risk, and indeed risk should be reassessed on a regular basis anyway. Stakeholders are important across the board. We know that, and we have to assess the impact when we're looking to change a particular project plan on the stakeholders concerned. How we're going to change, or some sort of procedure. I mentioned above about this idea of communication, and that's certainly important and mentioned here. You'll see here that this considerations when it's sort of changing a plan, sort of tie in with the elements of the original PID or the project initiation document. So really, I guess what we're saying here is that if we're going to change the original plan, we need to go back to that PID and look at the impact upon each of the core areas. Okay. Now, moving on to the next point, this last point. Now, this area of continuous improvement is not something that you'll see examined at all. In fact, I've never seen Kersner's 5 levels examined. We'll just take you through it fairly briefly. Really what we're talking about here is, I think, overall an individual entity's view of projects. In other words, where they see projects, within their organization. And I think the important thing here is to recognize is that each of these sort of 5 levels are sort of geared to sort of approaches to project management within a given organization. And really what we're looking to do, or perhaps what an organization would be looking to do, is just to go from sort of level 1 of common knowledge through to what we would call a state of continuous improvement. Now, I'll take you through them briefly. And really what we're saying here under common knowledge is that, we're having projects undertaken within the entity, and the knowledge that we have is sort of fairly basic, and what we employ is fairly basic training on project management for those involved in projects within the organization. In terms of this next level, this step up, and really what we're talking about here is really standardizing the process, standardizing the processes for project management. We're talking about project management becoming more widely used, and as a result of that, we're having to maybe standardize the process, the project management process. In this idea of singular methodology, really what we're saying there is that, again, we're stepping up to sort of level 3, and we're in a situation where because of the level of project, where perhaps the complexity, or indeed the number of projects that we're undertaking, we're sort of embedding a single methodology within the organization in order for us to be able to undertake projects effectively and efficiently. So really a step up from common processes, or indeed, standard process within the organization. We look up to sort of benchmarking. Really, we're looking at project management, and indeed we're looking at our competitors and really how they undertake projects. And really what we're saying here is that we're sort of upping our game. We're seeing project management is as a core sort of strategic function, and therefore very, very important for our competitive advantage vis-a-vis our competitors. Level 5, really what we're talking about there, and you'll be familiar with continuous improvement from your E1 studies. Really what we're saying there is that we're looking at some form of continuous improvement to our process, our project management procedures, in order to be able to improve our standard, or singular indeed, methodology. So this particular area is, as I say, it's not commonly examined. You won't find, as far as I am concerned, any questions on Kerzner within the E2 exam. I think because it's a little bit too detailed for the E2 examiner and for E2 for our level of requirements or exam requirements. So not something that I see as particularly core. Okay. Okay, I'm going to leave it there on this. Hopefully that's been helpful for chapter 9, and good luck with your studies.